Kentucky. In 1825, her name was Nanny Toole, and she married John P. Seitz in 1841 in Boonville, Missouri. John, who was born in Virginia in 1821, was not a religious man. Now, he was good-natured, yet he used his mouthpiece as a gateway for profanity. And this opposite-attracting couple, the faithful Campbellite and the mouthpiece for profanity, made their first home in Cooper County, Missouri, before they moved to Arrow Rock in 1844, where John set up a gun shop. And their only son, Charles, who was born in 1844, died in 1855. And after his death, Nanny and John opened up their home to orphans. And the success of the gun shop really propelled the couple into the middle class of the day. Arrow Rock was formally incorporated in 1829. It was the home to many wealthy antebellum plantation owners whose primary crop was hemp, as well as successful business owners like John Seitz. And the reason for this is it was the jumping off point for the Santa Fe Trail. Now, John absolutely adored Nanny, and he wanted her to have all the best that his success could provide her. So he expanded their very modest brick home by raising the roof. He added a couple of rooms, a staircase, a storeroom, and a very Victorian-style porch. And it was furnished and decorated with all the fineries he could bring in from St. Louis that were epitomized by this Victorian era. And Nanny was a very delicate and handsome and very tidy woman who dressed very fashionably, and John was sort of gallant. He was devoted. He was a very devoting husband. And he referred to
I'm as loud as I can be.
We got you.
Tell her not to curse.
I'm not hearing you.
Oh.
No. She's not hearing us?
No, she said no.
Oh, shoot.
What?
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry. You said you can't hear us, though?
That's right.
Okay. Can you hear me still speaking? No, she cannot. Okay.
Well,
So we're going to be able to hear you, but you're not going to be able to hear us then.
we'll have to text.
Okay, you'll have to somehow let me know when it's my turn to speak.
Okay. I'll give you a high side. I'll put my video on.
Okay.
All right.
Uh-huh.
All right, so we're going to get back to John and Nanny now. So John referred to Nanny as the apple of his eye, and she really took kindly to all his petting that he bestowed on her. Now, the Baptists, the Methodists, and the Presbyterians had already established congregations early on in Arrow Rock's history, but yet as this devoted and faithful Campbellite, Nanny really longed to worship with like-minded Christians. And the closest Stone Campbell church was the Lamine Church of Christ, established in 1843, which is about 8 miles away in Cooper County. And although Jan and Nanny didn't make that trip weekly to worship, they did attend the annual revivals that were hosted by the church. And at one of the revivals, the evangelist, and I'm sure along with Nanny, made such an impression on John that he publicly repented, he was baptized, and he joined the church. And John came back home to Arrow Rock and immediately went around to all his old friends and told them that he was beginning a new life, and he hoped that they would help him persevere in it. And then in 1872, John and Nanny Seitz donated the land on Main Street in Arrow Rock to build the church building, the Church of Christ building. The charter to unite in forming a congregation was signed in April of 1872, with men signing the charter on the left and women signing the charter on the right, and John was appointed as a deacon. Nanny died in 1900, and then John passed away in 1904. And it's unclear if the Arrow Rock Church of Christ became a disciples-type congregation before their deaths. However, we do know that on February 10th of 1910, a Mason Hamlin organ was delivered by the Parks Music House of Hannibal, Missouri, thus clarifying that move toward a more disciples-like congregation and splitting the church. However, they came up with a compromise, and that put it in place that was put in place that allowed the organ to be played before church and after church, but not during church. Now, the congregation remained active until the 1920s, and then the Great Depression took its toll on Arrow Rock, and the population was declining, and so was the size of the congregation. And then a tree fell across the church's roof in 1937, and there wasn't enough resources to repair it. So in 1942, some members of the Saline County Conference on Christian Churches tried to get the roof repaired. However, since it wasn't an active church with regular meetings, they couldn't obtain the necessary wartime priority to authorize the repaired materials to be sent. So then in 1947, they tried again, and a plan was approved to fix the roof, and there were some other damages. And then services resumed in May of 1948. Evening services continued about once a month until August of 1949, when the congregation joined with the Baptist and the Methodist, thus forming the present-day Arrow Rock Federated Church. In 1961, the Christian Church's last living elder and trustee led an effort to preserve the building. The Arrow Rock Craft Club began the restoration of the building in 1962 under a 5-year lease with the Christian Church Disciples of Christ of Mid-America. And then in 1982, the Friends of Arrow Rock entered a 99-year lease with Christian Church of Mid-America, completing additional renovations and placing furnishings in the church so that it would look like it did when John and Nanny worshiped there. Now the church is used to interpret church-going, if you will, in the mid to late 19th century. And it's also used for special services, weddings, and events in Arrow Rock. So this building saw a lot of transitions, but it was born out of a love story of John and Nanny Seitz. So now we're going to move to talk about a journey to Sojourners, and we need to let Colleen know she's up, so I'll text her.
I just gave her a thumbs up.
Okay.
Okay, I'm up, it says. I trust that you can hear me over there. I'm Colleen Carroll, and I've been pastoring South Joplin, now Sojourners Christian Church, for 11 years now. And you see the outside of the building there, which is roughly about 100 years old. There are absolutely no entrances or exits to the building without a significant flight of stairs, as you see on that front side of the building there. We were doing very well with the building, not using all of the space, but it was well maintained. But in the winter of 2021, there was a hard freeze, right as we were returning to worship after COVID. And the freeze actually, there was a spring that ran underneath our elevator that you'll see that little portico to the right of those stairs there. That was the only way for people with wheelchair access to get into the building. That's right where that pointer is. And so the elevator shaft was knocked off of its true course. At the time, especially because of COVID, we were not even able to get any elevator companies to give us a bid on fixing it. Most of them would shoot us a high estimate just to scare us away from wanting to do so. Most of the estimates were around $700,000 just to fix it. And we knew we actually needed to replace it and not fix it. So after listening to the congregation through some various listening circles that we held in town halls and so forth, we felt that our mission is to welcome and accept all people along a journey of faith and service. And if we weren't able to welcome all people, we were really doing a disservice to our mission. And so the building itself was a problem, and we had no other place where we could meet. If you could go ahead and advance to the next slide, you'll see this was the same as on the back of the sanctuary. He taught along the pathway, let the path continue with us. That was something I inherited when I got to the church. It was there, but it speaks to our journey as a congregation that believes in mobility and in change. So with that kind of mantra in the back of our minds, we started considering some options. If you'll go to the next slide, you'll see the Quonset hut, which some of you may even be familiar with. It was where we housed volunteers after the tornado who would come and assist with the rebuilding efforts. The Quonset hut itself was not an option for us to use because it had significant mold issues and we'd already shut it down for use. So that too was not something that was usable for us. And so we, at the time, were approached, oddly enough, by two congregations that wanted to swap facilities, both on the outskirts of town, but they were larger facilities than what we felt we needed. We would be doing just as much, pouring just as much money in to fix them up for our needs as we would be to stay in the building. So we turned those two offers down. But then we were approached by Peace Lutheran Church, and we were asked if we might consider either purchasing or leasing or some kind of a joint operation there. And so we moved our offices into the next building, if you'll move ahead to the slides there. The church owns actually two houses that sit on the block, and one of those off and on has served as a parsonage. And we moved our offices into that building where we are now currently located. There's 2 bedrooms, so there's an office for me and a conference room, and then the large living room area is for our administrative office assistant. It is right next to, adjacent to our old building, so we still kind of have a presence in that block, but that's just only for our offices. Our new home is with Peace Lutheran, if you'll advance to the next slide. They welcomed us with open arms. Our first worship service there was in November of 2022. And they were gracious enough to let us rent and share the facilities, mostly just for Sunday mornings and Wednesday evenings. But they were very compatible with us theologically, and we knew some of their members. We worship about 55 on Sunday morning, and they worship about 15. So they worship at 9 o'clock in the morning, and then they are usually through by 10, and that gives us about 45 minutes to turn the sanctuary around for our needs. They do not have a Sunday school hour, so that worked out well for us because while they were worshiping, we could do our Sunday school. On occasion, we have tried to do some joint fellowship dinners and a few worship services together, but we've been renting from them for about a year. And then just this last April, we signed the deal and purchased their facility. If you'll move to the next slide, you can see the outside of the building. Their original congregation, their building was completely destroyed in the 2011 tornado. And they rebuilt this property where it's almost to the edge of Webb City in North Joplin. And it's a lovely one-level facility with a beautiful sanctuary. You can move to the next slide. The sanctuary, it has a lot of ability for change, moving chairs around and so forth. We moved our organ in and allow them to use the organ. We still have a lot of changes to make in terms of we'll be bringing in our communion table and pulpit. We may be adding another screen. We've done a lot with microphones and things like that, just trying to get used to sharing the facility. The purchase agreement with Peace Lutheran, we paid a lower cash value for their building and facility than what they actually were listing it for. It includes the building as well as 11 acres of undeveloped property. But what we arranged and negotiated was for us to purchase the property for $290,000. a lot less than the 1.2 million that they were looking for. However, they have rent-free access for the next 25 years. So over time, they will be actualizing the cash value of their property, we hope. So the property now is our property, but we are sharing it just as we were before. If you move to the next slide, you'll see that we're just trying to show people who come in the door that we exist side by side. Sojourners Christian Church, we changed our name from South Joplin because obviously we're not in South Joplin anymore. And so we changed to Sojourners Christian Church, keeping the original logo that we had for continuity's sake. And we have tried to do a few joint things together outside of worship. It opens up the opportunity for us to do more things together and to have a stronger presence if we work together as congregations. Let's see, yes, I missed over the next slide has the different logo. You'll just see the only change was just the name change. Old logo said South Joplin Christian Church, and we kept Sojourners Christian Church. If you blink, you probably wouldn't even notice the difference. But that was intentional. The logo was designed just a few years ago, and we felt that it accurately reflects who we are as a welcoming congregation. And we didn't want to do too much that would confuse people about who we actually are. We're still very committed to our mission. We did, once the building was purchased, if you want to move ahead to the next slide, I'm sorry, it doesn't show you. At the top, the sign says Sojourners Christian Church, and then there's the lighted signboard. Underneath it, it says Peace Lutheran Church. On the flip side of the sign, those two are reversed. So the top of the sign says Peace Lutheran, and Sojourners Christian Church is on the bottom. This sign was financed by both congregations and just installed over the summer. And we're getting used to having a new way of encouraging people in the community to check us out. There is a large development of homes that is going in just a few blocks north of where our church is located, and we hope that this is an opportunity to welcome new families in the Joplin area to our congregations. And so far there doesn't seem to be too much confusion when people come, which congregation they're looking to attend. Most of the time, by the time difference, we know which service they're looking for. So in terms of opportunities that are in our future, if you'll move to the next slide, I mentioned that the congregation or the property has 11 acres of undeveloped property. The church was a very ecologically conscious congregation, Peace Lutheran, and they had already constructed a labyrinth that remains, as well as some walking trails, and there's a beautiful open area with sort of a mystical looking tree that they call the prayer tree, and they invite the public to come and make use of that property. And so as moving forward, we're considering having a joint green team, if you will, a green chalice and green congregation to further look into other ways that we can invite the public to make use of the property. We've also done several things in terms of joint effort. We hosted a concert recently. We have hopes for doing some more things together for outreach, doing joint effort fundraising for Crosslines, which is our food pantry with the Super Bowl carrying, and we've hosted a few events for children and invited their one family with a child to attend. So we're trying to make the most as we can of sharing space without merging congregations. That was a significant request on the part of both churches, that we want to be able to share the space without necessarily merging in congregations. So I think that last slide there, I guess I'm done.
I'm calling Colleen just to get her on the line. I'm hoping that she can call.
Hello, Mike.
Hey there. I'm just gonna. Maybe this won't work with the sound, but I want you to be able to hear where we are.
Mute.
That might help if I stay on my phone and not put it on speaker.
Yeah, if you mute. Okay, and I've got you on speakerphone here.
All right, I'm muted.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, perfect, all right. So here is a point after the love story about the historic Christian church and then the journey to sojourners, is that the church is not a building. So I think it's important for us to contextualize that with our presentation this afternoon. And for the historic Christian church in Arrow Rock, it found a new life. And John and Nanny's love story is really a part of that building's legacy. And it's a real example of the power of faith in Christ to change lives in the late 1800s. But again, the church is not a building. I spent 6 years in pulpit supply at Slater Christian Church, which was originally known as Mount Zion Christian Church, and it was organized in 1865 with a church building completed in 1866 at a cost of $2,000 back in the day. And the congregation continued to worship in this frame building until 1878 when it moved into town, the newly incorporated organized town of Slater, Missouri. And that's where the present building is located. And initial membership in Mount Zion Church was close to 40 people. The first church building was sold, and then in 1890, a new church building was erected. And then in December of 1936, the building was destroyed by fire, and then the present building that you see on the right side of the slide was built at a cost of $20,000. And part of the 158-year legacy of the Mount Olive Slater Christian Church are the Timothys and the Phoebes that they sent in to ministry, yet in great disciples tradition, beyond that legacy is the tremendous work of the many leaders, lay leaders, the teachers, the musicians, the pastors, the support staff, the deacons, the elders, all the folks throughout the more than a century and a half were a part of this ministry. And when you consider the multiplier effect of these disciples, thousands upon thousands of human lives were impacted by their ministry in this community, and then in the community of Slater, and then in far beyond that. On June 25th of 2023, the decision was made to close the ministry. And at the meeting, a committee of 3 was appointed to work through the process of closing. A commitment to open communication with participating and non-participating members was made. And when I say participating members, that equaled 8 at the time. Later in the summer, it was decided that the last worship service would be on December 31st of 2023. Now, as a member of the committee, I reached out to Kirby Gould, who's vice president of the Christian Church Foundation, who's a longtime colleague of mine through our work in Plan Giving. And then also she was chair of my ministry support team through the commissioning process. And she provided a lot of digital resources and attorney recommendations for us to move forward. And we, as the faithful 8, as I call us, we adopted a key guiding question from the Christian Church Foundation's Sacred Stories publication. This was that question. What is the most faithful, effective, and efficient use of our assets for God's mission? And then, inspired by a story that's published here by the Reverend Darrell Manson, we created another question to help guide us. As our ministry comes to an end in Slater, can a new ministry be born? And we didn't really put any parameters on what new ministry meant when we thought through this. So our next steps, we created an asset distribution policy. We debated the merits of selling the building, gifting the building, or demolishing the building. And we decided and took a unanimous vote that we were going to demolish the building after trudging through a lot of emotions. So we communicated with the contact list about what was going on. We got bids for the demolition, and then we were approached by a real estate company who wanted to take over the building. And then we were approached by another congregation who wanted to potentially take over the building. So we had a couple of other options to then pursue. So as that was going on, I was in the process of consulting a local attorney about us closing, and that attorney said, hey, you know what, just shut down, don't worry about it, nobody's really going to know the difference. Well, when I reported that back to the Faithful Eight, they were like, we are not doing that. So upon Kirby's recommendations, we contacted Ed Holderly of Spencer Fane in the St. Louis office, who has a real heart for ministry and has worked with the Christian Church Foundation, and he and several other attorneys have worked with us over the course of the last year to help guide us through the process. And the big thing that we had to look at was we were chartered as a Chapter 352 benevolent organization. And to shut down one of those old things ain't easy. And it requires a lot of additional legal leaves to go through that. And so the recommendation from the attorneys were that we convert to a Chapter 355 nonprofit corporation. And then that would be easier for us to ultimately shut down the ministry. So that's shutting down the ministry. We're still dealing with what to do with the building. And what I have to say to you that is so important if this comes up in a congregation, you have to step back and own the fact that you're going to mourn the loss of what you had. And even though the church is not a building, there is a great sense of loss. So we had to take time to process our emotions as the Faithful Eight. There was a lot of prayer, there were some tears, but there was a lot of good conversation about that. And part of the mourning process was initially, let's demolish the building because we don't want to be like the Methodist church down the road in Gillum, Missouri that got purchased by somebody who had big old plans and now the roof's falling in and it's just falling down, and we don't want to drive down Main Street of Slater and see the building just fall apart. So let's just tear it down. We'll give the lot to the city. They can put a park on it. There'll be a plaque that there was once a church there. Once we had finally owned that emotion and that decision, we got approached by the real estate company that they didn't want to buy it. They wanted us to gift it to them, but they wanted to use it as a community center. And about the same time, a smaller congregation in Slater wanted to take over our building to expand their ministries. Unfortunately, they weren't able to get the support of their district, and that didn't become an option. And so we went back and worked with the real estate company and decided that that was the best option. That so many in the community felt the building itself was an important part of the community. And so now the Slater Christian Church is called The Gathering Place with the Slater Chapel. And it's open for a variety of events, but they also are working towards hosting the senior citizen meals and trying to do some intergenerational things with different varieties of groups. So the building has found a new purpose. But again, the church is not the building. And so as we continue to mourn and make decisions, one of the things that really helped with the mourning process is reaching out to the Disciples of Christ Historical Society. And we worked with the archivist, her name is Shelley Jacobs, about what's important. And she said, what records in that church tell the story of the church family? What records show what the church supported and valued from a ministry perspective? And so that was very cathartic as the Faithful Eight began to go through the records of the church and finding things that we shipped out to the Historical Society. Now they may digitize some things, but they wanted the actual articles. So we shipped out, I think it was 3 great big boxes of information from the history of the Slater Church. And then it was time to plan the last worship service, which we really wanted to be a celebration. Ron, as our regional minister, was a participant in that service. One of the other pulpit suppliers was a part of it as well. And it was a difficult day, but it was a way to be thankful for and acknowledge the ministry that had taken place for over a century and a half, and to bring a sense of closure. That happened on New Year's Eve of 2023. But we weren't done, and we're still not done. So it took a moment for us to get converted to a 355, and we have to, as a part of closing down a 355, provide to the Secretary of State all of the 501c3 organizations that we will distribute our remaining assets to, which we have done. And as the Faithful Eight gathered to discuss that, that became a ministry opportunity that provided a great deal of healing in the mourning process, to know that the other organizations and ministries that we're going to support with the remaining assets will be able to do even more because of the legacy of the Slater Christian Church. And that, I think, is where we came back to one of these guiding questions, and that was, what new ministry might begin as we close our ministry? So, as we are distributing our assets now, there's the official list that the Secretary of State is going to get, and we're waiting for one more step before we can distribute those. But there's the unofficial organizations that maybe weren't officially a 501c3 with the Secretary of State, but they were a part of our mission-mindedness over the years that we've been supporting, and we've been distributing those checks and getting lots of thank you notes, which also is a part of the healing process. So one of the things that Colleen and I wanted to talk about, if you advance the slide, as we close up our session today, is to look at some resources, but also to look at the process and some of the things to consider. And so I've mentioned to you the resources of the Christian Church Foundation, which were so valuable to us in the process. But Colleen wanted to talk a little bit about some of the interesting things in the process that happened with becoming sojourners. So you notice the first line is, we worked with an attorney, doing business as, I talked about the chapter 355 and 352. Colleen, do you want to jump in and talk about some of the other challenges you had?
Sure. Am I doing this on the phone, or do you need me to unmute?
Unmute, and I will take you off speaker, and I'm not sure what I'll do. There we go.
Okay, our congregation was established over 100 years ago, prior to the Disciples of Christ restructuring. At the time that the church was formed, we were South Joplin Christian Association. What happened was that when we went to sell our facilities, we had to go through a title change because we were not listed as South Joplin Christian Church Disciples of Christ. So one of the first things that I've been saying far and wide to any of the pastors and congregations that are in existence with a similar history, go back and check your titles, even if you have no plans right now to sell, to close, to relocate. It's just something that will make life much simpler. Make sure that your title reads whatever your current name is, including the association with Disciples of Christ, Christian Church Disciples of Christ. We are also, since we've moved to a new facility, we had to have a new appraisal of the grounds, even though it is currently, or it was a church that we were purchasing from. So we've had to go through the process of the assessor wants to make sure that we're still a not-for-profit organization. So there's all kinds of red tape to how many people are engaged in outreach ministries, how many people are served, all that is holding up our not-for-profit status. We did choose to to rename, but we are still doing business as South Joplin Christian Church. So of course there's banking documents and all kinds of things that go with that. So there were some things that we just really were not prepared for, and I guess that every congregation has a different hurdle to overcome, but patience is a virtue, as they say.
Indeed. And one of the resources that Colleen and I, can you hear me okay, Colleen?
Yes.
Okay. One of the resources that Colleen and I both said was very helpful to us is working with the Disciples Extension Fund out of Indianapolis. And James Michael was a wonderful consultant for us. Even though some of the things that he could do from a real estate standpoint to help us, we didn't ultimately need to do because we decided to give the building. He was a wealth of information. So as you're looking at transitions, I think you'll find him to be a great resource. I mentioned the Disciples of Christ Historical Society, a wonderful way if you're closing a ministry to really think about the legacy of that ministry. And then the final resource that I want to talk about is the regional office, because Ron was great support from the beginning to the end, and Paul came in as well. We had a discussion with the Faithful Eight, with both regional ministers. And one of the options that the regional ministers said was, you've got some money, you can keep meeting as a group of 8 for as long as the money holds out, if you want to do that. And that was something that helped, I think, us process, is that an option? But these 8 folks were tired. They were just tired, and they were ready for us to retire the ministry, if you will. The last point I want to make, then any questions, and we're pretty much on target for time, is there are some official letters that have to go to the regional office once Slater finally is closed up, which may be happening in the next few weeks because we're getting close. And so I encourage you, if the transition with the building includes the retiring of the ministry, to work closely with the regional ministers to make sure that we're dotting all the I's and crossing all the T's with that. So Colleen and I are happy to answer any questions you might have, and we'll figure out how to do this. You can still hear me, right, Colleen?
Yes.
Okay, so if you can't hear the question, Colleen, I can repeat it. Are there any questions? Well, hot dog. Yeah, Teresa.
How did you all sustain yourselves as ministers in the process?
Did you hear the question, Colleen?
No.
How did you and I, sustain ourselves as ministers during the process? I'll let you go first, Colleen.
I am blessed to work with a very, I'm getting reverb, a very committed eldership and leadership in the congregation. We are able to be very honest with each other, and I think we're all on the same page in terms of wanting to maintain a viable ministry. So there was a lot of collegiality in the leadership. I did also take a sabbatical this last summer, and that helped to propel me forward into the next chapter as we continue to keep moving things into the building and figuring out where they're going to go. Peace Lutheran is still experiencing some grief over not being able to revitalize their congregation after the tornado, and we've had to be very, very gentle about moving their belongings and moving ours in and so forth. So the sabbatical didn't hurt.
For me, I came at a little different perspective from with a couple of points. I was pulpit supply. I had been pulpit supply since December of 2017, and I was at the pulpit twice a month. So I was the most regular pulpit supplier, but they had several other folks that had filled in for those 6 years before the decision to close. There was a level of emotion with me because after my mother passed away and my father remarried, he married a woman who had been a longtime member of Slater Christian Church, and she and her first husband had raised their children, their 2 daughters in the church. Their older daughter was the organist, so there were a lot of family connections. And for me, the 6 years of being at the pulpit, I got to know my bonus mother much better than I would have had I not been coming to church. So there was a level of emotion, but also her health was declining, my father's health was declining. In fact, he passed away on New Year's Day, the day after we closed the ministry. So there was emotion involved, not at the level that the longtime church members. One of the faithful 8, it's the only church she has ever been a member of, and she was 78 years old, or is 78 years old this year. And so she grew up there, was baptized there, got married there, raised her kids there, and so it was very emotional for her. So I think without knowing, I had to put on, knowing I was doing it, I had to put on the pastoral care hat to help us process through the emotions. But also, I could contextualize it because of my professional career in higher education for 36 plus years, and my PhD is in leadership. They needed my leadership and asked for that, and so even though we needed to take time to mourn, we had to stay on track because people were tired. And I mean, we've been 1.5 years by the time we finally get this all closed up. Could it have gone faster? Maybe, maybe not. So for me, I think I approached it as I'm retired from the University of Missouri, so I don't have a full-time day job gig, right, as we're going through this process. But I was able to take time for self-care in other ways. Plus, they were so appreciative that they didn't have to go through all of the administrative detail, that there was somebody to lead that so that they could process their emotions. So I think it was a very nice balance for us in the process. Any other questions? Because we still got a little bit of time. If not, I'm turning it over to whom?
Why don't you make your announcement, Mike, about the upcoming training
Oh, okay.
while you're there?
Public service announcement. On November 16th, I am leading an anti-racism, pro-reconciliation workshop in Arrow Rock. It's called Voices of Arrow Rock, a stage for underrepresented voices. Voices of Arrow Rock is a reader's theater series that brings to life underrepresented voices in the village's past. As I alluded to, Arrow Rock is a very historically significant place for Missouri's history, but also westward expansion. And we talk a lot about a few citizens that were prominent at the time, but we don't talk about the underrepresented voices. Those enslaved African Americans, African Americans who were emancipated, the Osage, who were the first folks there, and the women who were very vital to Arrow Rock's past. And so the workshop, we will actually watch one of the episodes. It's called Ignore the Shadow, and its theme is mixed race identity. And we'll meet the characters in the video, and then we will work through what's called a moral map and a growth continuum, with the objective of driving ourselves, pushing ourselves towards more empathetic understanding of issues related to race. It'll include lunch in the village, and also tours of the African American Museum, the State Historic Site. Arrow Rock is the first state historic site in Missouri, and several of the other elements in the village. And participation in that workshop fulfills all the hours related to the ARPR continuing ed.
Let's give our thanks to Mike and give our thanks to Colleen. Thanks, Colleen.